created a warm and engaging narrative for your podcast. Consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts, Victoria Cornelio and myself, Jensen Cummings. Today is part one of a two-part episode, our first ever two-part deep dive. We're talking greenwashing. What is it? How do you identify it? And who's guilty of it? All right, so Victoria and I, this is twofold. We want to, for ourselves, as we navigate this space, start to better understand what's happening with companies, with organizations, with governments that are leveraging this green space for good or for manipulative purposes. Also, we want you to be able to identify as you're making decisions as a consumer, as somebody who's navigating these spaces professionally, somebody who's looking to start a business or an NGO in this sector. We want to make sure that you understand some of the trials and tribulations that others have gone through and kind of come from a perspective of honesty and understanding, be able to apply that. So as the green sector continues to grow and flourish with challenges, that you have an opportunity to navigate that space properly and correctly. Did I get that about right, Victoria?
Yep, I think you hit it in the head.
All right. So let's start by kind of laying out what is greenwashing, because it is a term either that people have never heard or one that has become kind of just a catch-all term for anything happening in this space that we don't quite understand, and who's doing what, and is it certified, validated, is it honest, any of these things. So can you give us kind of a broad overview of greenwashing?
So I think the best definition I can think of, and everybody, just so you know, the blog is going to be full of references and everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that'll be really useful. And the definition, I'm going to read it verbatim from a study that I really like. And basically, greenwashing is the intersection of two firm behaviors: poor environmental performance and positive communication about environmental performance. So it's a dichotomy as it is, right? A company may engage in environmentally harmful practices while simultaneously promoting an environmentally friendly image. And it's really hard to define because it can be many scenarios, but the core of it is you are lying about the things you're saying.
Yeah.
Basically.
Misleading at the very least.
Exactly.
Right. And trying to sometimes siphon credibility from very established and very difficult, expensive, complicated practices and processes to get to a point of actually being able to contribute or not contribute to negative impacts on energy, on climate, on environment. So
I think that's
today's
one of the reasons I find greenwashing specifically vile, because you're not just lying, just 'cause. You're doing it knowing that you're not doing the things that you need to help the climate. You're doing things outside of the law. You're doing things to manipulate consumers. Like, it's very specifically mean, I feel.
vile is a great word. And we're gonna call out some companies that have famously been in the wrong and been called out for some of these practices. In today's part one, we're going to focus a little bit more on kind of the language, the labeling, the imagery, the packaging, some of the design, some of those kind of static pieces that happen. And then next week, we're going to focus more on some of the media, the marketing, the PR, some of the kind of manipulative processes that are happening to potentially sway or trick consumers in this type of space. So let's get into that a little bit. The first one, kind of generally speaking, is vague claims. This is one of the ways that we kind of are trying to just be on the edges of saying, yeah, we're doing things and using words like sustainability, like eco-friendly. And one of the companies that got put on blast for this was H&M. They had what was called their conscious collection. It was really trying to say that they were using, I know, it's kind of laughable, very vague again, like what does that mean? What's the actual practices or processes or materials that you're utilizing? And they basically were using some of those words, sustainability, eco-friendly. If there was no practices that they would point to, and there was no measurable results of the impact that they were having. So that's one of the ones. Vague claims. When we talk about vague claims, where does that take you? What are you thinking about when we reference vague claims?
I mean, there's something to be said. The word sustainability has a very specific definition of something that can withstand for a long time, and that's it.
Mm,
So you can greenwash sustainably if you keep doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, sustainability in the green sector doesn't have a specific term. There are no metrics that say this is sustainable, which is why the vagueness comes in. The issue is H&M is a fast fashion company.
yeah,
So
the opposite of sustainability.
there is no way. Like, even if we don't have a hard definition on what sustainability is, fast fashion, we can all agree isn't. So the claim,
Yeah, because it's literally like it's one cycle. It's like here's your trend of the
yeah.
day.
And
Next,
I think that's why they
next,
said conscious
next.
collection, because there's something being conscious about what you're wearing. And again, I understand fast fashion has a public and it's a good thing when it comes to economics and being able to buy something that you need in the moment. There are a lot of things to be said about fast fashion, but a lot of these things, a lot of people who engage in fast fashion is because the economic circumstances don't let them engage in different kinds of fashion, right? So there's a systemic issue there. It's not the consumer's fault for engaging in fast fashion unless you're someone who could afford the other thing and you're going for that, then that, that's a bit crazy. But I
It doesn't mean there's not a benefit, right, Victoria? Like there's a benefit to this. You're trying to amplify this benefit or this economic or business model that you have as a company like H&M being in the fast fashion space, and now you're trying to elevate it in a way that's manipulative and not in fact sustainable or eco-friendly. The other thing is the measure of degree in this is something that I look at a lot. Could they have used a couple materials that make that line more eco-friendly than all their other lines? There's a real possibility that that could be true. But to say that in a way that makes it seem like it is net eco-friendly, that's the deceptive
exactly.
part.
That's why I'm telling the
Because you're in a space where you are a negative impactor on sustainability as a whole and the goal of sustainability. And that's the part that's deceptive. They're not saying this is more eco-friendly than our past products. They're saying this is more eco-friendly in the fashion space as a whole. And that's the part that's manipulative and
exactly, it's
deceptive.
towing the line. And then you're asking consumers to check out your impact reports to see if it's true. And this is the thing, as consumers, we're supposed to be able to trust companies. We shouldn't have to do an audit before we walk into a shop. So you're banking on that thing that people aren't going to check. People aren't going to call you out. And then when you get caught, you're like, "No, but wait, sustainability means nothing." Like, and it's called conscious,
Yes.
and then that's where it comes in. I think that's why I find it so messed up because it's like the whole thing about greenwashing, especially in fast fashion, there's so many systemic things that have given birth to fast fashion, and we just don't address them. We just say like, "Well, you can either buy this or buy that."
It always feels like that. I can neither confirm nor deny. It's like you're not saying anything.
Exactly.
You're literally not saying anything. All right, the next one up was false labels. One of the companies that got in some hot water over this was Innocent Drinks. Usage of homegrown eco labels or undefined symbols. So I think of the recycling symbol, recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle. We forget about the reduce and reuse, and we just think that recycle is the whole thing. But we know that kind of angled arrow triangle. I'm describing that horribly. But we recognize that. You also see like a green leaf being something that's eco-friendly. So people have recognized that we are perceiving certain types of labeling and symbols as then representing from some accredited third-party source that this product does in fact meet certain certifications, certain parameters, certain expectations, and they're just making those up and putting them on their label so they look nice, they look more eco-friendly. They in fact have no eco-friendly impact that they can stand on whatsoever. This is something when you're shopping and you're at a grocery store, a supermarket, and you look at all these labels, you're like, ooh, that one looks more green. And we're getting tricked. I'm guilty of it all the time. It's like, that label looks more green. It looks less like a mass-produced product. And you look at the packaging, you look at the labeling, you look at the ingredients, you look at whatever it might be, you look at the company that actually owns it, you're like, it's the same company. They're charging me $1 more for different packaging. Like, what is going on here? So labeling. What are your thoughts on labeling?
I mean, hey, I work in marketing, so we use color theory and we use certain fonts and things like that to invoke a certain message that you want to do. And this is the thing with greenwashing. You're taking the basics of what the industry is and flipping it to manipulate people. You can find 3 bottles of wine that look the same, and the labeling is gonna shift to one way or the other. One might look more chic, the other one might look more elegant. The other one is just now we have the trend of minimalism, so it's very basic. A lot of green marketed things now are very basic. You know,
Mhm.
you can see in skincare as well. You can see it in things like foods. It's just cereal. And it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yes, it's minimalist." There we go.
Two of the other companies that got in some trouble here, Coca-Cola and Unilever, which specifically food and beverage, and then some beauty supply stuff.
Yeah.
And again, this is where I love what Gary V says. He says, marketers ruin everything. And it's kind of true because we take it too far. The idea of marketing and being able to take a product, a service, and connect it to its actual audience that brings value, and being able to get a message through a whole bunch of white noise, to me makes a lot of sense because it breaks through and allows somebody to make a decision that really is of value to them. So even though there's some aspects of it that you're showing them something to evoke an emotional response that then triggers a purchasing response, can and is manipulative, but often if it's done correctly and honestly, it's creating an interaction and a relationship that person needed or wanted. They just weren't understanding the space or the product or the service as it stood before, and you opened up the opportunity.
Sure,
That
yeah.
being said, when you're now taking that and being deceptive about it and tricking them and utilizing honest marketing, packaging, labeling, and design, and trying to take that and just live on the fringes of it to pretend like you exist in that space, and then hoping you can trick enough people to create a market share in that space, that's where these companies are getting in trouble with
Yeah,
this.
and they should.
And they should. I
They really
agree.
should.
Yeah, I agree. This is a place where cancel culture gets it right.
Yeah,
It's like we need to be
100%.
making purchasing decisions based on some semblance of a reality in what we're actually purchasing, not just because it makes us feel a certain way, even though we're doing the exact same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah. And I think this is something I said in our very first episode. Tools are tools. Marketing is a tool, right? And if we're using it in a way of giving people what they need or our perceived need or just convincing them of different things, like the gym, I think is a really good example. I've seen a lot of different gym marketing. And you can go either way. You know, you can get the shaming way, you can go the get strong way, you can go the this is a free space. There's so many ways you can market a gym, right? Yeah. Some of them will evoke different emotions, but at the end of the day, if you're doing something that is preying on people's insecurities or people's desperation or people having a need, like a lot of us feel a duty to save the planet, then you're capitalizing on a sensitive subject, and that's not what marketing should be. I shouldn't have to tell you, oh, you're going to get wrinkles, so you should get this cream. You know.
Yep. All right, so initiatives without transparency is another one we see a little bit, where we're using certain types of language to position a product in a way that makes us feel like they're moving towards something that we believe in, without any action whatsoever. So Nike got into some trouble with this with their Move to Zero campaign. And it really invoked this idea that they are trying to move to, a zero footprint, right? That became a thing. What's your zero carbon footprint? And we know that Nike has some kind of horrific practices when it comes to the production of their products and the way that they have managed that over the years. And we've seen horrible images of, sweatshops in Southeast Asia where these things are being produced and they cost 12 cents to make, and then they're charging a $180 to $500 for a shoe, right? So I think some of that's already known. Some of the responsibility, though, I do feel like falls on the consumer a little bit, to the sense that, like, we already know some of what Nike's doing, and we keep allowing certain companies to reframe without making actual change. So that's something that they got in trouble for specifically, and other companies have done that, where they're framing themselves and their language in a certain way, moving towards something without actually making anything. So some initiatives without transparency. How do we create a desire for, and then an opportunity for, transparency when you look at these spaces?
I hate to say this, but like you said, a lot of it goes down to the consumer. It shouldn't be our job, but a lot of things shouldn't be our job. Vague language like eco-friendly, green, natural, and there's no explanation, there's no evidence. This is something I will give the UK props for. When you read something that says, "Oh, this is made with, I don't know, 90% cotton," at the bottom, it'll have an asterisk and it'll tell you the breakdown of that cotton, because we have very strict marketing laws here. Because again, you can't just lie to people. But as a consumer, if you are seeing these very vague language being thrown around, specifically some of them tend to be quite strong buzzwords, then look for third-party certifications, right? Things like Fairtrade, B Corp, Energy Star, FSC, Cradle to Cradle, these kinds of things, right? You can also, there's a lot of websites where you can check what certification a thing has. But then again, if you're just going around your normal Thursday and getting some groceries, you're not going to stop and do that. And that's the issue. We don't have time to do that, but we've been put in a position where if we don't, then we might be supporting the wrong thing. And that's just an unfair place to put a consumer in.
Yeah. Adding another layer of challenge, maybe even politics onto that, is we're in a space right now where there is so much distrust for institutions, for those third parties. So, like, we don't trust the company, we don't trust the product, we don't trust the accrediting agency, we don't trust the oversight, we don't trust the regulation, to a point where a lot of these companies are actually, like, thriving because of that, because there's so much chaos in understanding of messaging and expectations from the consumer. I'm afraid that we're potentially at this place where we just go, I give up, I'll just buy whatever, right?
Well, I think that's why we have to look if sustainability is central or superficial. I think Pride is a good example of this. A lot of companies come out with a Pride collection and then it's done for the rest of the year. Is that what's happening with sustainability? Are they coming in with a thing for Earth Day or for Save the Trees and stuff like that? And it's this microcosm of a whole thing they're doing. Are they launching one green product in this array of products that they have? Right? Is this something that is central to them or is it superficial? I think it's a really good way for us to start seeing and weeding those things out. And if you find a company that you like, brand loyalty is a great thing.
Yeah.
Because you can trust them and you can keep up with them.
And you still can hold them accountable and still check in.
Exactly.
All right, still check in, make sure that there's some of that. We're in a space where brand loyalty used to be a lot more ingrained in the fabric of the way that we made purchasing decisions. I think as everything got cheaper and more disposable, we stopped caring about that, and the price points and the convenience of it became more the goal and driving factor. Things like Amazon, Alibaba, stuff like that, where you could get anything instantly, where we cared more about that than we cared about the brands. I think there's been a big pendulum swing in that, and it continues to swing. The hope is that there's going to be more expectation of sustainable products, green products, where we start to actually invest our money, ongoingly into those things. That's also culturally different, to your point of giving the UK some credit versus what happens here in the United States sometimes. But even within state by state, you see some of that, where where we used to live was like you couldn't get a plastic bag. So now I have to like fight to use my bag. Don't use the plastic bag, and you get kind of looked at weird. So there's a cultural difference in that expectation. And now, instead of it being a conscious decision, people are casting doubt on it sometimes, and that makes it even more difficult to make those type of conscientious decisions when there is political and social pressure on top of the fact that you need to know what's going on with these products and how you utilize them for yourself. And now I'm back to an existential crisis, like what I seem to always be on this show.
Well, again, this is the thing. We can't separate socioeconomics from how we make decisions, right? I can't ask you to invest in a really good quality pair of shoes if what you can afford is fast fashion, because you have other priorities that you have to put your money into, right? But just like we choose how we put our money into things, see where the money goes to the companies that you're giving money to. That's what I'm talking about, brand loyalty. There are brands that I keep getting things from because I check their financials, I check their CSR reports. Most companies have to publish a CSR report, and if they don't, trust me, Greenpeace is going to call them out. So just Google company Greenpeace and all the articles are going to come in. But again,
Yeah,
you're
it's a
asking
good
a
call.
consumer.
Maybe part of what this episode is teaching people how to Google better to find the information that they're looking for. That makes a lot of sense. Company Greenpeace, that's a
Yeah.
good.
Or
I'm
Friends
gonna
of the
start.
Earth, Earth Island Journal. You can find there's a lot. But again, I have a brand loyalty for example, Client Earth. Absolutely love those guys. So anything they say, I am going to trust it, but I trust it because they always give a disclaimer at the bottom of who's writing it and where they're coming from. Again, I am a single woman in my 20s with a lot of time to spare. I can't ask someone who has a different lifestyle to me to try to fit that in. And it's a priority to me. So again, there's a cultural shift because I have that as a priority in my life. So I go back to it. This is why greenwashing is so vile, because you're asking a consumer to make all the decisions when we should be able to trust our institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Ooh, that trust and
It's rough.
accountability, they go hand in hand, but sometimes are hard to separate. All right, some kind of hidden trade-offs on the back ends of products. Keurig got into some problems here with their kind of recyclable pods, but there was an impossible like process for it. I think of a lot of that where there's so many steps that happen after the purchase to be able to accomplish the thing that is the
Yeah.
reason that you bought the product in the first place, that then that becomes a barrier that most people will not engage in. So it's like I feel good about buying the product that's recyclable, but then I'm not able to accomplish the tasks involved to be able to make that happen. And that, to your point, comes in sometimes when, again, it's our responsibility to take those steps. But these companies know that most people won't take those steps. It brings me back to a rebate. There's like a rebate.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, look, I get money back. 90% of people never send that. And you have to send it within 3 days or some crazy number. You have to send it on your first kid's birthday. And that's the only day of the year that you're allowed to get this
That
rebate that
accounts.
it counts. That will never happen. And they're banking on that to make sure that the product doesn't, in fact, cost the rebate amount. So there's a lot of just jumping through hoops that I think consumers get a lot of fatigue in this space, because people in the sustainability, green space, impacts on climate change type space have already said, I'm willing to put in more effort, put in more thought, put in more money to be able to get things that have a positive impact. They are leveraging the fact that they are going to make so many steps that it's impossible for people to actually sustain that for themselves. So
Yeah. But we're also very misinformed. I think there's a lot of things like recycling sounds like a very easy process, but not everything is recyclable in your specific area, right? So biodegradable plastics are a good example. It's not that they break down naturally, is that they break down naturally in an industrial composting condition. Do you have an industrial composting condition in your area? If not, it's going to go into landfill, and then they're going to turn into microplastics. And then we're back into the whole process again. Again, I'm not asking people to check if they have it. I'm urging you to check because we can't just rely on the information that we're given if we're given any. A lot of this information isn't shared. You don't have an asterisk telling you, "Oh, we're gonna recycle this down the road where we have these facilities." And if you're already going out of your way to buy things that are sustainable, a quick Google, just a quick Google to make sure it's really
Use
sustainable.
the
Don't waste
Google.
your time trying to be sustainable.
Use the Google. All right, this brings up lesser of two evils.
Mm.
Ryanair is an example here. They had low emissions.
And funny TikToks.
They do have funny TikToks. Low emissions. So basically saying we're just less harmful than the other guy. Basically what
Mhm.
we're doing there. We're not actually low emissions. We are just lower emissions
But
than the
we're
other
better
guy.
than
It
them.
reminds me of that dumb joke where it's like two guys in the Arctic, a polar bear starts running at him. The one guy is freaking out. The other guy
It's gonna
just
be
ties up
quicker.
his shoes real tight. He goes, "What are you doing? You're not going to outrun a bear." He's like, "No, I just have to outrun you." Like,
Exactly.
well, come on. Is that the point that we're at?
Survival of the
Yeah,
fittest.
it is totally survival of the fittest in that mode. And that's just not a good or sustainable approach in any way, shape, or form when it comes to these companies, is like low emissions. How do we I would still rather lower emissions knowing that I'm impacting this when I make a purchasing decision for travel. It's just, again, manipulative to be like, I'm just trying to outcompete the other guy versus actually having a holistic approach to lower emissions.
I mean, I'm sorry to say, but when the bar's on the floor and you're a bit higher than that, you're doing pretty good. And if you have nobody accounting, like keeping you accountable for it, you're also doing pretty good. If you don't have to explain yourself, you're doing pretty good. Being faster than the other guy, you're doing better. But I think, again, I think I've said this before, if we ask for things, we get them because in capitalism, they want our money. So, what do we want? Lower emissions. Well, that's why Ryanair has lower emissions, and that's why they're out buying EasyJets because people are like, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that one." It's not like I'm not gonna fly. I'm just gonna fly more sustainably, quote unquote.
Yeah, and then we get like the dopamine hit of feeling good about ourselves. And
Yeah.
did we actually have an impact? Again, is a is a small impact, is an incremental impact better than no impact at all? Probably. Does it mean that we get to think or act in a way that we all of a sudden are creating a net lower footprint impact? No. Like I don't think that we actually do. It comes back to our episode with Tom Murphy, the astrophysicist, who said if the Titanic had had solar panels, it still would have sunk. And I was like, oh, okay. So we need to make more holistic and more radical changes to be able to have an actual impact at the end of the day, because otherwise the Titanic is still going to sink. This last one, there's so much of this misleading data and metrics. Who hasn't gotten in trouble in this space? But ExxonMobil was the one that came up when they were touting some of the use of the algae biofuels. What came up, and trying
Oh
to
god.
basically masquerade behind those metrics and data, and not looking at the metrics and data that in fact are the totality of the impact that they are having. And so we're doing a lot with metrics and data to be able to manipulate the numbers and show you one corner of a corner of a corner that somehow has, again, the incremental
Yeah.
small changes, and then touting that as, look at what our company is doing. It's like, no, one corner of a corner of a corner is doing that. And it's still and it still is a black
That
eye,
corner
but
still
not
looks kinda
quite
bad.
as bad as the other elements. So data and metrics, how do you look through that? You specifically said you're going to
Yeah.
highlight some of the studies and things that you look at
I
as
mean,
an academic yourself,
again,
as
I
somebody
think
who's
it
just immersed in kind of the studying of the things that you're looking at. how do you sift through those data and metrics to get to kind of the bottom right corner and go, oh, there is a net impact here?
I think you used the word holistic, and I really like that word. And I think it's scary for people to live holistically because there is so much thinking you have to do. And I think you don't just start living holistically overnight, right? So electric vehicles are one of the things that we are the most misinformed about, or that we actually don't care to know more about, because EVs are fully green. We don't have to talk more about it. Okay. How did you get the batteries for it? All the mining for lithium and cobalt that has to go into it. The charges for like the way you charge them are fossil powered grids. So we might be misinformed and not know these things, or we might say, no, I know these things, but it's still better than, because the numbers tell me there is less CO2 from EVs than this, from that singular thing. But the whole thing, things don't happen like that. Like, you don't ask the genie to give you something and it comes out of nowhere. And I think that's where I implore people to look holistically. There's a whole chain that happens behind the things that we get. And it's really important to see those things, because again, it's really annoying to try to live sustainably. There's a lot of asking, there's a lot of skepticism, it's really tiring. So you don't want to then find out that this really good thing that you thought was really good isn't actually really good. But then again, the bar's on the floor.
Yeah, because you might only have the opportunity to make 3, 4, 5 decisions that you hope have an impact and make a shift. And if those aren't even making any kind of shift, then that's when people kind of give
Yeah,
up
you
and they
get
go, well,
discouraged. And in
it doesn't
academia, you
work.
see a lot of academics going back and forth on this point, because there is the big debate of like, well, little change is better than no change. It's like, that is true, but little change is exhausting because you're not seeing anything change, so you end up doing no change. That's the issue.
Is the hope that it's like the gym? You go to the gym once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, you don't see a difference. You go for an entire year, you see massive potential shifts and things
Yeah.
like that. So this is, again, for us in this episode, in these episodes, and everything that we're doing, we are trying to explore and ask questions and be curious in a space that is immensely impactful and important and immensely complicated and convoluted at times. Our role and job is to try and have the conversations, trying to ask the questions, not have all the answers, but be able to allow you to be a part of the conversation so that you can decide the ways in which you want to live, the impacts that you want to have, the companies that you want to support, the companies that you want to start, the work that you want to do in your life. That's why we're here. That's what motivates us to do this. So greenwashing was an important concept because it's come up multiple times, and it's going to help us suss through all of the white noise of this space that we're in around sustainability, clean energy, climate change, when it comes to work that we're doing with Tangelic and with Tangelic Talks. So that was kind of our talk on what greenwashing is, how to identify it, who's guilty of it. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more on the kind of the PR, the media, the marketing side from a campaign standpoint, from some of the shallowness or the manipulation that might happen there, some of the blame shifting that's happening in that space as well. So we'll get into that next week, and we're excited to be able to have a 2-part where we can dig in a little bit more, because sometimes 30 minutes or 33 minutes is not enough time.
Yeah. And they go by quickly.
They go by really, really quickly. So any last thoughts? Otherwise, we'll let the people go and we'll get into it again.
Well, just a teaser for next time. Something that I want people to know. Some oil companies spend more on marketing green initiatives than they invest in clean energy.
Woo.
And you can find those links on the blog.
Find those links on the blog. This will be one of the most valuable blog posts to check out that's connected to these episodes, because you'll be able to go down some rabbit holes and some resources, and you'll be able to follow the money, which I think is an important thing to remember. Follow the money, and you'll see kind of where we're making our decisions on both the creation side and the consumer side of some of these things. All right, that's it for this episode of Tangelic Talks from Victoria and I. We appreciate you.
Bye.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.